He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content and support us at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
As we gather today, we give thanks for this good food, thanks for good health, and thanks for... Oh gosh, hang on. Knock it off. As I was saying, we give thanks for good health, and we give thanks also for... Holy moly. All right. Okay, that's it. I've had it up to here with... We give thanks for good company, both indoors and out. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Cryptid Clues. I am your host, Taylor, and today we're going to dive into a creature that shares similar attributes to, or very well could be, another variant of Bigfoot, specifically located in Lawrence County, Tennessee, United States, the Whistling Patty. Now, as per last week in our Encounters episode, I mentioned at the end that this specific cryptid became immediately intrigued to me because of the audio reports that this creature makes to potentially lure individuals, but just its audio vocalizations in general. But we'll get into that later on this episode. The Whistling Patty has another name, the Screaming Patty, and has reports going back by at least a few decades cited in the northern part of the county. Reports also specify that this creature resides in the areas of Anderson Creek and Summertown, both in Tennessee. Now, a brief report I found comes from a man named Dwayne Stewart back in 2013. He was raccoon hunting when he had his encounter along Anderson Creek. He described it as being a predatory creature and that you could always tell when it was near due to how the dogs reacted, refusing to hunt and just being terrified. The downside is trying to find visual descriptions of this creature. It's proven very, very unfruitful, and the information surrounding this creature seems prominent if you reside in the aforementioned areas of Tennessee. Sadly, I do not live there, so I have to form my own hypothetical examination, but of course, isn't that the usual theme of our Cryptid Clues episodes? I digress, however. Thankfully, with the power of the internet and a little bit of savviness on where to look, you can find some very interesting things regarding this cryptid. Now, assuming at this point of our episode that this is a similar creature or is indeed a Sasquatch, let's get the lay of the land, notably the Laurel Hill Wildlife Management Area. While heavily traversed by humans, it seems like a great place to hike, boat, fish, hunt. It's a great outdoor location. A rich and diverse ecosystem thrives here. Albeit not ideal for a large group of bipedal creatures to reside year-round, I'm sure, but it certainly would be an ideal spot for those off-seasons when hunters aren't permitted during specific months, people aren't boating, it's cold, all that stuff. I did an episode a while back that actually talked about how certain national parks are closed due to severe weather dangers and the opportunity that provides for local wildlife to traverse into areas that are otherwise normally dense with human traffic. Now, again, I can't confirm or disregard the idea that the whistling Patty is going to be going into this little protected area, but a Sasquatch group small enough would most likely thrive in a hotspot that's so diverse of an ecosystem like this, especially if they were to pinpoint those off-time seasons when humans are at an all-time low presence. So I have a list here of some of the wildlife. I won't go through the entire thing because it's a heckin' large roster of animals, but here's a few. We have snow goose, Canada goose, wood duck, mallard, American black duck, trumpeter swan, wild turkey, ruffed grouse, red-shouldered hawk, eastern screech owl, great horned owl, northern flicker, common raven, black bears, raccoons, cougars, elk, deer, gray fox, coyote, wild hog, bobcat, cottontail rabbit, squirrels, beavers, muskrats, armadillos, chipmunks, mouse, rats, and moles, to name a few. There are so many more. That just paints a great picture of the rich environment that can house such a diverse ecosystem of wildlife. The biggest threat here is a cougar and black bear, from what I could tell, which would most likely evade any sort of confrontation with a much larger bipedal creature passing through. Now, of course, I can't dismiss the heavy presence of rangers that monitor this woodland, and how can you not? People going in to hunt and fish in off seasons and entering areas they shouldn't. Well, it does require special attention and protection to keep such an ecosystem well preserved. But I always do wonder if a reason for these rangers is to keep tabs on the movements of not just the animals, but specific cryptids as well. I don't have anything to back up such a wild hypothetical theory, but again, it is hypothetical. I did find another brief report of an older man who claimed he saw the whistling Patty actually kill a few of his dogs. This was while he was out hunting. He then proceeded to follow him back to his vehicle. And I haven't heard many reports personally of Bigfoot killing dogs of hunters. Just the fact that they can get aggressive. The notion here, though, that really stands out is the fact that it follows him back to his vehicle. It implies that escort you out of here attribute that is often included with many of these Sasquatch reports. Now, this wildlife area is 14,952 acres in size. 85% of the property is mature hardwoods. That basically means strands of trees that have fully grown, especially in height, so they're huge. So with a hypothetically established hunting and hiding location discussed, let's get back to this creature and the similarities that we can attribute it to being like a Sasquatch from what we know and what we are understanding of Bigfoot. Now, a common attribute to the whistling Patty, and again, one of the reasons for its name, is the sound it makes. And I quote, "Noises similar to a baby crying or a woman screaming." This is something that at the beginning of my cryptid journey was unknown. But recently, this year especially, it has become a prominent thing. Very rare, albeit not limited to just Sasquatch, but in Sasquatch reported areas, it does happen. So I can understand that assumption and connection between the two components, thinking, well, it must be a Sasquatch making these baby crying noises and whatnot. Now, full disclosure, I have no affiliation with Small Town Monsters, but I love watching their stuff. I really do. And I highly recommend watching some of their episodes that specifically target Alaska. I will reference one bit of information they discuss when women were present in a specific remote location. One at a time, some of them actually could hear baby cries and woman cries coming from the woods. Now, Reuben and I have discussed this before. It's unsettling, but as a human being, one of the most, luring and instinctive things you could hear is a baby crying. It's that baseline instinct that makes you want to go make sure things are okay as if the child is your own. Granted, I can't speak for everybody, but it also has that animalistic sense to it, if not out of protection and sanctuary, but curiosity and wonder, like, oh, what is that making that noise? Let's go take a look. If I, as a human being, was not able to deduce the fact that, hey, that's not right, Why would a baby be out there in the middle of these remote woods? One could assume a more innocent-minded person could stroll right out of the safety of a village or cabin and go somewhere they shouldn't be. I wish I could pinpoint where I was told this at one point in my life, but this individual explained how people in certain situations, and it defines certain different characters of people and what you do in these scenarios. You're walking down a pathway in the dark, and up ahead, you see two lights shining back at you. Okay, one person's going to think that's eye shine from an animal. It could be a big bear or cougar. I'm going to turn around and go the other way. And everything works out fine. Or the other person thinks, oh, you know what? Maybe there's a couple of fireflies flying around. I'm just going to keep on going. And maybe things don't go well for that person. And basically it implies that, well, we're all the same. We just need to make sure we can step out of a situation and think on it and not just stroll in innocent minded like, hey, what is going on out here? What are these baby sounds out in the woods here? But no, we have, all of us, the wonderful ability of deduction, and that's what needs to be applied in these cases, because these situations could be very dangerous. And I've never heard these sounds, and if I did, I would never plan to follow them. That is just me though. Moving on, and I digress, I found a report from a few years ago where an individual assumed it was a Sasquatch, albeit they were still new to the cryptid world. They became unsettled because when they had an encounter with something mysterious, it was then their wife that had two separate occurrences within that same week that really started to make things uncomfortable for this individual. So she had described something that sounds like a child in the woods crying. Now, let it be said now that they live in a fairly remote part of Canada, but being a mother herself, she confidently could say that it wasn't a real child. In her own words, the sounds were too high-pitched and had a sort of a strain to them in a slightly different off-putting way. Now, the police did go out there to investigate, but that didn't yield any results. They are nearby vacation homes that sit vacant for most of the year, but that's just what they were. They were vacant. So several calls were also placed to the Fish and Wildlife, but that also yielded no results. Now, the husband, and I quote, believes, this particular animal had bad intentions for my wife and was angry that she was gone and took it out on my property. I also think it was female. I think this one was maybe migratory because where this house is, hardly nobody ever stays out in that area year round. And I think that it's familiar with what a firearm is capable of because of how fast it retreated. And as I said, there's never been another incident since then. End quote. Now, a couple of things to note from this: migratory routes. We spoke to this idea earlier, with certain parks closing down at times of the year. To me, it's valid and makes sense that creatures can identify human off-season in specifically remote areas that allow them to pass through undetected, especially if you're following the food and you're trying to move out of the rougher weather, the seasons, and the coldness. It makes sense. And the next point is how the wife identified the baby sounds and could discern something different about them, being a mother herself. A little bit of a side story here, but it's how I'm relating to this scenario. Now, for many a time in my life, hearing babies cry and such, to me, sounded fairly the same across all babies. One baby sounds just like another. But since I've had my own kid, it's incredible how you can actually discern different things in the sounds they make. And again, you develop it and you kind of spend more time with your kids, so it's going to naturally occur. But it's especially prominent in their cries. It's a form of communication. And so when my child cries in comparison to other baby cries, I absolutely can hear it's a different child compared to my own. I'm not saying it's a heightened sixth sense or anything, like I mentioned earlier, but at least for me, and I reckon this woman as well, it's just one of the many things that develops when you become a parent. Or you're a sound acoustics expert too. That would also make sense. But in short, I believe this woman is fully capable of identifying that it's not a real baby. And now in closing to this episode, I have one final report coming out of Lawrence County, Tennessee. And you can actually reference this report on the BFR website. It's report number 24547. This was almost 70 years ago, back in 1955 in Etheridge, Tennessee. And I quote, I don't remember how to get back to the old farm place, but even if I did, it's not the same anymore. So much land has been cleared. Hello all. I'm a 56-year-old woman that has never gave a second thought to the life of what people call a Bigfoot. I knew him as the Whistling Patty as a child. That is what my grandparents and all the neighbors called him. Our neighbors were far and few between, but every one of them knew the whistling Paddy. That is what they called him. I myself can remember his screaming and whistling sounds as a child. We lived in the deep woods in Etheridge, Tennessee. No electricity or indoor plumbing. He was always around and we were used to his sounds, and he came for scraps at night. He did not eat any meat, only peelings from potatoes and other veg. He or she was white with red eyes. Like, as I know some folks are called albino, I guess, my grandparents were not learned people. They could not read or write. They had to sign with an X. But they knew he was real, and they did not fear him, and saw him or her lots of times, and thought it was okay that they called him, so I guess it was a male. My aunt, who lived about a mile away, opened her back door one night to throw out her dishwater and threw it on a Paddy because he was standing at the back door. It did not scare her because she was used to him, and although she had 9 children, she went and got some potatoes and gave him, for she said he was hungry. This Paddy was about 7 to 8 feet tall and did not hurt anyone ever. I would like to know if anyone else has ever heard of one called a whistling Paddy, because that's what he was called when I was a small child growing up in those woods, and we did not fear him. But we had to come inside right before dark because Mama would say Paddy is out here and we can't trust him. We don't know who he is. If anyone else ever knew of a Bigfoot that was called by the name of Whistling Paddy, I would like to know. He would tear the bark off of the trees that my young uncles had built tree houses in. Other witnesses, or everyone who lived in this area, knew Paddy. As a child, neighbors would come sometimes and tell about the Paddy at their house or in the woods behind their house. And the other night, they have him food too. Even if it was potato peelings, he would take them. We were poor people and cooked our peelings for the family to eat. But my mama always made sure we had a full belly and saved something for Paddy. He always came at dusky dark, never bright daylight. End quote. Now, this report was followed up with an investigation, which goes as follows. I quote, I visited with the witness at length on November 19th and found her to be a very charming, down-to-earth, and sensible woman whose family experienced some amazing interactions over a number of years with a white, furred Bigfoot that they nicknamed Whistling Paddy. The witness explained that while growing up, her family lived in a rural area of Lawrence County, near Etheridge, Tennessee. Her grandparents had no running water, no electricity, no indoor plumbing, and the area was remote enough that there were a number of bootleggers living in the hills. The witness also explained that while she never saw the creature herself, she remembered hearing its whistle. She also heard various relatives and other local people speak about seeing it. Additionally, she had 2 uncles who were in the woods one evening in a treehouse they had built when Paddy came up under their tree. She related it was a frightening experience for them, though they were not harmed in any way. Her family routinely set out food for the animal, usually potato scraps. Tracks were often found in their yard after a rain, and as she explained, there was not a lot of grass in the yards in that day and time due to the chickens, goats, etc. running loose, and it was quite common to see numerous immense human-like footprints in the bare dirt in their yard area. Her grandfather had a particularly small foot, and he always marveled at how easily his entire foot, with a shoe or boot on, fit completely inside the track. The witness still lives in the same county in Tennessee, and about a year ago she was out on her patio grilling after dark when she heard an unusually loud, long, mournful call. The witness raises dogs, and she stated that every one of her dogs started howling when they heard the sound. Becoming frightened, she asked her husband to come out on the patio with her while she finished grilling. He stayed for a while, but when nothing further was heard, he went back inside. It was not long after that the witness heard the familiar whistling sound that she had heard so often as a child. She immediately knew what had been calling. She recounted her experience to her 2 children, and not long after, her 10-year-old son got up during the night to get a drink of water and heard the same moaning howl. He was very frightened and immediately came running into his parents' bedroom and climbed into bed with them. As a final note, the witness told me that she was prompted to file her report after reading about the Tom Biscardi hoax on the internet. She's very angered that someone would make a mockery out of an animal that she grew up knowing about and accepting the same way that we accept the presence of deers, squirrels, and other local wildlife. end quote. What an amazing report that is. There's so much you could source and break down out of that. And after all of the investigating that we've done this episode, at the start where I would not confidently say, okay, Whistling Patty is indeed a Sasquatch, this one report alone helps provide that context that I needed to fill in the gaps. Stuff that I was just missing before. And it's amazing because all across the planet, of course, we see different names for Bigfoot. Wood boogers, Yeti, Yowie, Orang Pendek, the Yeren, Barmano. I'm glad to have explored the Tennessee titled version of the Whistling Patty. And it just fits having this other name variant for this Bigfoot cryptid. In closing, just regarding this experience and this report, I very fascinated hearing, okay, we have these individuals up in a tree, not just tree house, but you have hunters in tree stands, and these things have been known just to stroll right underneath and sometimes not even notice that there is a human being in a tree above them. They appear, some of them have done some weird things, and then sauntered off into the woods. Stuff that is scary enough to make a hunter never go back into the woods. Just very interesting. The other point of interest I wanted to highlight was that the Tom Biscardi hoax. Take a Google, look into it. In a very, very short summary, it just looks like fake DNA staged, just one of those attempts to prove that Sasquatch is real, and it is absolutely far from it. So that's just basically a little summary of that that has unfolded. And it is very upsetting because when you're raised in a scenario where, oh yeah, the Whistling Patty is as real as the birds, it's as real as the geese and the dogs and the goats, you can take offense to that. It's especially a very nostalgic thing if you've grown up with those things. I have things that are very nostalgic to me, and I've had other people probe them or make fun of them, and it does hurt, and it can be very, very standoffish. But this woman did the absolute most courageous and amazing thing. That's such an honest thing, is to take very personal, private, family and neighborhood community related matters and discuss it and be interviewed about it. That's just incredible. And you can repair the damage that has been done by people who are faking it with fake DNA and fake prosthetics and whatnot. You can really, really heal that scenario by providing your experiences like this. And it goes a long way. When I started looking into the Whistling Patty, I was really finding not a lot of information. It was very tricky. Most things are just like, oh yeah, Bigfoot this, Bigfoot that, and so forth and so forth. Here's a little summary on the location, but I love to get into how these things could survive. Did they have the right food source? Did they have the right terrain and size of a homestead to reside in? And there's just so many cool little things that you can pull from that other animals use and rely on, and you can attribute it to cryptids. That's kind of the theme that I've done with other cryptids and such. It's always fun to get into it with Reuben too, but I digress, and I am rambling on. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I hope if you're one of the Canadian brethren, you've had a great Thanksgiving weekend. If you're out in the States, then I guess your Thanksgiving is sneaking up to in the next month, so I hope you're all happy, healthy, looking forward to that, good food, good company. With that, though, this episode draws to a close. You can find us on our website at CryptidClues.ca, our social media channels, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. And should you wish to reach out to us directly, you can via CryptidClues@gmail.com. So until next time, everyone, thank you, take care, and stay safe.